What if the monsters weren't the ones covered in leather and chrome? What if the real demons wore expensive suits and lived in pristine mansions? What if your only hope for salvation came with the thunder of a Harley-Davidson engine, ridden by men the world had already condemned as outlaws? This is the story of a whispered plea heard over the clatter of a roadside diner. A plea that ignited a war between a gilded cage and the unyielding loyalty of the Hells Angels. The rain fell in relentless gray sheets, smearing the neon sign of the Last Chance Diner across the slick asphalt of the forgotten highway. Inside, Alara stared into the swirling vortex of her black coffee, a perfect mirror for the storm raging within her. Each tick of the clock on the wall was a countdown to Richard's return, to the suffocating silence of their home, a silence that was always louder and more threatening than any shout. He had allowed her this small outing, a calculated act of mercy designed to remind her of the freedom she could see but never truly possess. A leash, long but unbreakable. Her hand trembled as she lifted the heavy ceramic mug, the sleeve of her cashmere sweater slipping just enough to reveal the faint, violet shadow blooming on her inner wrist. A ghost of a fingerprint. Richard's fingerprint. She quickly pulled the sleeve down, her heart hammering against her ribs as if trying to escape the prison of her own body. A deep, guttural rumble shook the diner's windows, a sound that grew from a distant growl to an earth-shaking roar. A line of motorcycles, chrome gleaming like polished bones under the weeping sky, pulled into the lot. The lead rider swung his leg over a massive, blacked-out Harley, his movements economical and powerful. He wore a leather vest, a kit, adorned with the terrifying and iconic death's head patch of the Hells Angels. He was followed by a mountain of a man with a wild, gray-streaked beard. They stomped into the diner, bringing with them the scent of rain, gasoline, and an unapologetic aura of danger. Alara shrank in her booth, making herself smaller, trying to become invisible. These were the men mothers warned their children about, the boogeymen of the open road. Yet, as they settled at the counter, their laughter low and rumbling, she felt a strange, illogical pang of envy for their raw, untamed freedom. The one with the beard, who the other called Grizz, caught her eye for a fraction of a second. His gaze wasn't leering or predatory. It was observant. He saw her flinch, saw the way she hit her wrist, and he leaned over to whisper something to the leader. The leader, whose vest identified him as Jax, the chapter president, turned his head slowly. His eyes, the color of chips of ice, locked onto hers. There was no pity in them, but something far more potent, recognition. He saw the same haunted look he'd seen once before, in a mirror image of his own sister's face, years ago. That memory was a shard of glass lodged permanently in his soul, a wound that never fully healed. Jack slid off his stool and moved not toward her, but to the booth directly behind her. The worn leather of his kilt creaked as he sat. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence filled the small space, a silent, intimidating testament to a power Richard, with all his money and influence, could never comprehend. Alara's phone buzzed on the table, the screen flashing with Richard's name. A cold dread washed over her. She had been gone an hour. Too long. Her hand shook so violently she could barely answer. "Yes, Richard," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. His voice was a silken blade, devoid of warmth. "Enjoying your little adventure, my love? Don't be late. We have guests tonight. You need to be perfect." The unspoken threat hung in the air between them. Or else. She hung up, a single tear escaping and tracing a hot path down her cold cheek. She wiped it away furiously, but it was too late. Jax had heard the fear in her voice. He motioned to the waitress. "Whatever she's having," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "and a slice of that apple pie." "Put on my tab." The waitress, wide-eyed, nodded and scurried away. A moment later, a plate of pie appeared before Alara. An act of simple, unprompted kindness. It was so foreign, so unexpected, that it broke something inside her. The carefully constructed dam, holding back years of despair, finally cracked. She fumbled in her purse for a pen, her mind racing. This was it. This was her last chance. The name of the diner was a sign. As she stood to leave, she walked past the biker's table, her movements stiff with terror. She accidentally dropped her crumpled napkin near Jax's boot. He didn't react, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window. She didn't look back. She fled the diner, the bell on the door sounding like a death knell. Jax waited a full minute before bending down. He picked up the napkin, the paper still damp with her tears. Unfolding it, he saw the shaky, desperate script. 2 things, a single word and an address. Help, 1420 Willow Creek Lane. Grizz leaned over his shoulder. Well, damn, he grunted. Looks like the porcelain doll has a wolf at her door. Jax crushed the napkin in his fist. The ice in his eyes hardened into frozen steel. A flashback, violent and unwelcome, seared through his mind. His sister, Sarah, with a similar bruise, making excuses for her husband. He just gets angry sometimes, Jax. He doesn't mean it. Jax had believed her. He had wanted to believe her. A week later, she was gone. He had vowed on her grave that he would never again stand by and watch a wolf devour a lamb. This was not just a woman in a diner. This was a chance at a redemption he thought was long lost. Back at the clubhouse, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer, old leather, and Brotherhood. The roar of engines had been replaced by the low murmur of men who lived by a code stricter than any law. Jax stood before them at the heavy wooden table, the president's gavel resting silently beside his hand. He smoothed out the napkin and placed it in the center for all to see. Richard Sterling, Grizz announced, reading from a tablet. Real estate mogul. Big money, bigger connections. The house on Willow Creek is a fortress. Private security, cameras, the works. The man is a pillar of the community on the outside, but the whispers say he's got a nasty temper and ties to some unsavory people to keep his business clean. A younger member scoffed. So he's a rich prick. What's it got to do with us? Jax's gaze silenced him instantly. It has everything to do with us, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Because he put his hands on her. Because men like him think their money and their walls make them gods. They think they can own people, break them, and no one will ever come for them. He paused, letting his words sink in. They're wrong. He didn't need to mention Sarah. They all knew the story. It was part of their chapter's lore, the ghost that rode with their president. We're not the cops. We're not the courts. We are the consequences, Jax declared. We ride for her. Church is in session. All in favor. A chorus of ayes thundered through the room, the sound of fists hitting the table like a volley of gunfire. It was unanimous. The plan was simple, born of years of operating outside the lines. They would watch. They would wait. And when the moment was right, they would extract her. They weren't kicking in the door with guns blazing. This required finesse. A ghost operation. 2 days they watched from the wooded hills overlooking the sprawling estate. Grizz, a former Army recon specialist, had a high-powered scope, providing a running commentary that was equal parts tactical analysis and dark humor. Look at that fountain, he'd grumble. Tacky. Probably imported. Bet he kicks it when his stocks go down. They saw Alara only twice, a fleeting shape behind an upstairs window, as pale and ephemeral as a phantom. They saw Richard Sterling plenty. They watched him berate a gardener until the man was practically crawling. They watched him drive off in his gleaming silver Mercedes, a mask of charming civility plastered on his face. Then, on the 3rd night, they got their opening. Richard left for a downtown gala, an event that would keep him occupied for hours. Showtime, Jack said into his radio. The night was moonless, a perfect cloak of darkness. Jax, Grizz, and 2 other members, Preacher and Tiny, moved like shadows through the manicured lawns. Grizz, with a laptop and a tangle of wires, knelt by the main security panel. Give me 90 seconds, he whispered. Sterling paid top dollar for this system. He did not, however, pay top dollar for the installer who used a default master code. Idiot. A quiet beep and a green light flickered on his screen. We're in. You got a 15-minute window before the system reboots and alerts his private security. They moved with practiced efficiency, silent specters in the opulent sterile house. It felt cold, lifeless, a museum of wealth rather than a home. Jax took the stairs 2 at a time, his gut leading him. He found the room at the end of the hall. Locked, not with a simple knob, but with a heavy-duty deadbolt installed on the outside. A cage. He didn't waste time picking it. Tiny, a man whose nickname was a piece of classic biker irony, put his shoulder to it. The wood splintered, the frame groaning in protest before giving way with a loud crack. Alara was huddled in the corner, her face streaked with fresh tears, her eyes wide with a new terror. She thought it was him. She thought Richard had come back to finish what he'd started. No, she whimpered, scrambling backward. Please, no. Jack stepped into the dim light, raising his hands slowly. He held up the crumpled napkin from the diner. We got your message, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever imagined it could be. We're getting you out of here. Relief washed over her so powerfully her legs gave out. She sobbed a raw, ragged sound of a soul unburdening itself. Jax helped her to her feet, his touch surprisingly gentle. Can you walk? She nodded, still trembling. They were halfway down the grand staircase when the sound sliced through the silence. The crunch of tires on the long gravel driveway. Headlights swept across the front windows. Grizz's voice hissed over the radio. He's back. Sterling is back. Abort. But it was too late. They were caught. Richard Sterling stormed through the front door, his face a mask of fury. He was on his phone, bellowing at some underling. I don't care what it takes, you fix it. I own that. He stopped dead. His eyes took in the scene. The splintered doorframe upstairs, his wife, tear-stained and disheveled, being held by a giant, leather-clad biker, and 3 other terrifying figures arrayed in his marble foyer. The mask of civility shattered, revealing the monster beneath. His rage was not that of a concerned husband, but of a collector whose prized possession was being stolen. What is this? He snarled, his voice dripping with venom and disbelief. Who the hell are you? Get your filthy hands off my wife. Jax gently pushed Alara behind him, creating a human shield between her and the source of her torment. She's not your wife anymore, Jax said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. She's not your property. This is over, Richard laughed, a high, unhinged sound that echoed in the cavernous room. He was looking at Jax, but he was speaking to Alara. You did this? You brought these animals into my house. After everything I've given you? You ungrateful bitch. He took a step forward, his fists clenching. He completely underestimated the men standing before him. He saw thugs, grease monkeys, white trash he could crush with a single phone call to his lawyer or a crooked police chief. He didn't see warriors forged in fire and loyalty. He saw a problem he could solve with violence, the only language he truly understood. I'm going to kill you, Richard hissed, his eyes locked on Jax. And then I'm going to deal with her, he lunged. It wasn't a calculated attack. It was a blind, narcissistic fury. He charged at Jax like a bull, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the feral rage twisting his features. The confrontation was over before it truly began. Jax didn't even flinch. He moved with a brutal economy of motion that spoke of 1,000-bar fights and a life where violence was a tool, not an outburst. He sidestepped Richard's clumsy charge, his hand shooting out to grab the front of Richard's suit jacket. He used Richard's own momentum against him, pivoting and slamming him face first into the wall next to the grand staircase. The impact sent a priceless vase crashing to the marble floor. Richard crumpled, gasping for air, a smear of blood on the pristine white wallpaper. He wasn't prepared for this. He was used to victims who cowered, who cried, who absorbed his rage. He wasn't used to an opponent who met his fury with a cold, terrifying calm. Stay down, Jax commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. But Richard's arrogance was a sickness. He staggered to his feet, his face contorted. You'll pay for this. You have no idea who I am. He reached inside his jacket, fumbling for something. Grizz moved faster than a man his size should be able to, his massive hand clamping down on Richard's wrist with the force of a vice. He twisted, and a small, silver pistol clattered to the floor. Bad idea, Richie, Grizz grunted, shoving him back to his knees. Real bad idea. Richard knelt there, broken, humiliated, his power utterly dismantled in his own home. The illusion of his control was shattered. He was just a man, a bully who had finally picked a fight with a bigger predator. Alara watched from the base of the stairs, her hand covering her mouth. She wasn't scared. For the first time in years, the fear was gone, replaced by a strange, fierce sense of liberation. Seeing her monster brought so low, so easily, was like watching the sun rise after a decade of night. He was pathetic. All this time, she had been terrified of a pathetic, angry man. The bikers got her out of there, melting back into the night as silently as they had come. They took her to a safe house, a quiet ranch owned by a retired brother. The women of the club, the old ladies, descended upon her with blankets, hot tea, and a quiet understanding that required no words. They had seen this before. They knew the language of survival. Alara spent weeks there, slowly uncoiling from the tight knot of fear she had been for so long. She learned to sleep through the night without waking from nightmares. She started eating, the color returning to her cheeks. She even laughed, a sound that felt rusty and new in her own ears. Jax would visit, not often but enough. He'd sit on the porch with her, sharing a coffee in comfortable silence. One day, he told her about Sarah. He didn't share details, just the raw, aching guilt. "I should have seen it," he said, his gaze on the distant hills. "I should have done something." "You did," Alara said softly, her voice steady. "You did something for me." Richard, true to his word, tried to retaliate. He sicked his lawyers on them, filed police reports, and called in favors. But the Hell's Angels operated in a world with different rules. They didn't fight in courtrooms, they fought in the shadows. Grizz, with his network of contacts, started digging. He found the shell corporations, the laundered money, the blackmail Richard used to build his empire. They didn't leak it to the police. They leaked it to his business rivals and the IRS. His empire crumbled not with a bang, but with the quiet, relentless efficiency of 1,000 paper cuts. 6 months later, Alara stood on a stage at a charity event, a motorcycle rally for a domestic abuse shelter. She was no longer the pale ghost from the diner. Her voice was strong, her eyes clear and bright. She told her story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. In the crowd, a sea of leather and denim, Jax watched her, a rare, small smile touching his lips. The death's head on his back was silhouetted against the setting sun. After her speech, she found him by his bike. "Thank you," she said, placing a hand on his arm. "You and your brothers, you gave me back my life." Jax just nodded. "We're the bad guys, remember? Just happened to be in the right place at the right time, the air filled with the deafening roar of 100 engines starting at once. To the world, it was the sound of menace, of rebellion. But to Alara, it was a symphony. It was the sound of freedom, the sound of unlikely heroes. So I ask you again, what if your only hope were leather and rode a Harley? Sometimes, the angels you need aren't the ones with white wings. They're the ones with dirty hands, loyal hearts, and the courage to ride straight into the mouth of hell for a complete stranger. Share this story if you believe that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, and comment below with your own stories of everyday saviors. And if you or someone you know is in a cage, know that there is always a last chance, always a hope that can be heard, even in the quietest whisper.